The Metal Gear franchise is undoubtedly one of the best and most consistent franchises in video game history. It is the peak of what the stealth genre has to offer, and it's not even close in my opinion, with Metal Gear Solid 2 being a solid example of that. With me saying that, why is it that I'm kicking off this series with Metal Gear Solid 2 specifically, and not its predecessor? Well, although the first Metal Gear Solid is a game that I'm more than able to go back to and enjoy just as much as I did when I first played it, it's not a game that I would say has aged as gracefully as its sequel. Metal Gear Solid 2 is literally just Metal Gear Solid, but a lot more refined. It does everything the first game does, but better. The controls and the overhead camera is much better. You don't need to have the card key equipped to open doors, which was a little annoying. And it doesn't really suffer from the extensive backtracking of the first game, with the last point being what cemented my decision in saying that Metal Gear Solid has unfortunately not aged like wine. Although Metal Gear Solid 2 does have a bit of backtracking, it's incredibly tame when compared to the first game. The big shell is just a lot more concise and easier to navigate through than Shadow Moses, and that stupid fucking PAL key can get played like a damn fiddle for all I care.
Like a damn fiddle!
I know the remake, Twin Snakes, does improve upon basically all of these aspects of the first game, but to be honest, that game... well, it exists, I'll just say that.
Sorry, I forgot. Damn!
But as a whole, if it wasn't for what I just mentioned, I'd probably have kicked this off with Metal Gear Solid, as there are aspects of the game that are still pretty amazing today by the PS1 standards, like the voice acting and cinematography. It's definitely aged well in my opinion, especially compared to most games from that era, but it just did not make the cut sadly.
Like one of my Japanese animes.
With that out of the way, let's move on and be used as pawns by the Lalilulelo, while managing to avoid
Browning.
It's quite amazing how this game turned from pretty controversial because of Raiden replacing Snake to becoming one of the most beloved games in the franchise, with Raiden becoming a fan favorite who eventually got his own spin-off game.
Well, if it isn't your saucy beans.
I think it's definitely understandable though why a lot of people were salty at the time, considering you actually start out playing as Snake for a brief period, only for this dorky whitehead dude with girlfriend issues to take his place for the rest of the game.
Did you say nerd?
Not nerd, node.
Oh.
Was sleeping with me a part of the job? I'm afraid of the night.
I've personally always liked Raiden, but that could likely be because I was born after the game was released, so I was already aware of the change in perception of the game and of Raiden's character when I first played it.
Adios, amigos. We don't need them around to filter and foster their memes any longer.
It's still interesting to observe though just how much he's grown on people since then. And regarding Snake, I mean Uruguay Pliskin, I quite like the sort of mentor role he plays for Raiden in this game. It kinda makes you feel like you're observing the living legend from an outside perspective, so to speak, rather than viewing everything through his shoes.
I don't smoke.
Keep it anyway. May come in handy.
As for the actual game itself, like I mentioned in the beginning, it is a big jump and improvement from its predecessor, and not just mechanically, but also graphically as well. I'm not gonna fault the first game for its graphics considering the hardware limitations at the time, but the graphics in its sequel to this day still look amazing in my opinion for a PS2 game that came out in 2001. It's really impressive. Although of course, graphics alone aren't enough to make a solid game. The gameplay is always what makes or breaks it, and Metal Gear Solid 2 definitely does that right. To this day it still holds up really well. Firstly, the game gives you several options in how you approach your surroundings, allowing you to hide in closets and hang from ledges to stay out of sight, as well as use empty magazines, books, and the coolant, oddly enough, to catch a guard's attention and or confuse them, which allows for a much more flexible way of avoiding or provoking enemies than Metal Gear Solid did. Moreover, the addition of being able to hold soldiers up as well as aim and shoot in first-person mode was honestly such a massive upgrade. It definitely makes it feel much more authentic as a stealth game, being able to keep your distance like that, and get enemies to drop various items and dog tags, the latter of which is needed to unlock things like infinite ammo and stealth camo. Obviously you don't have to collect all the dog tags, it's entirely optional, but the rewards are well worth it in my opinion, especially the stealth camo. You could argue that the first game did it better considering you just have to get what is considered the bad ending of that game, but I like the challenge here. It doesn't feel forced, and once you get enough dog tags for the stealth camo, getting the rest of the dog tags is a piece of cake.
Freeze!
Don't kill me.
Regarding the gameplay as a whole, I would consider Metal Gear Solid 2 to be the perfect middle ground between Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 3. While it is an overall improvement in quality from the first game with smoother controls, better graphics, a superior camera, and so on, at the same time it still keeps things simple like the first game did with things like rations and healing. In Metal Gear Solid 1, this is how you heal. In Metal Gear Solid 3, this is how you heal.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
And this is what I mean when I say that this game is the perfect middle ground. Everything works pretty much exactly as one would expect it to work, without adding anything that's needlessly time-consuming or tedious. With the exception of this water section, which is what I would consider to be the only part of the game that I don't really enjoy all that much. I know I gave the first game crap because of its backtracking, and you could say that this segment is also quite tedious and boring, especially considering that I have actually complained about it in a previous video, but I wouldn't say that it's enough to taint the overall game. It's really easy to navigate through thanks to the radar, and it's over fairly quickly. To me, this part of the game is essentially just some dust that's on the bottle of this wine, and doesn't actually affect the overall quality of the wine itself and how well it's aged. Everything else about this game and how it functions is pretty much exactly what I look for in a video game. And with each and every subsequent playthrough of it ever since I first completed it years ago, I find myself loving it more and more and more and more. I love all the boss fights, I love sneaking through the tanker and the big shell, and I absolutely love the attention to detail in this game. The amount of secrets and little interesting things and details that Metal Gear Solid 2 is just abundant in is simply astounding. It puts most games out there to shame, both old and new.
The first image is... Oh, this is,
What?
nothing. It's nothing. But this isn't a photo of Metal Gear anyway. Sorry, but you're gonna have to go back and shoot another set. I'll just make a backup of this one.
There's an amazing video on YouTube titled MGS2 All Secrets and Interesting Stuff by George Salonik, which showcases just how extraordinarily rich in content this game is, which I'll link in the description if you're interested. I'd highly recommend giving it a watch, it's really incredible.
I'll just
Make a backup of this one.
Okay, now so far, I've mostly just talked about the gameplay, and more than 20 years later, it still holds up extremely well. But it's not the only aspect of this game that has aged like wine. The story and some of the themes that it tackles takes MGS2 from what I would otherwise consider an excellent stealth game to an absolutely sensational classic worthy of all the praise that it gets. That codec that you hear just before your final fight with Solidus alone is seriously scary with how accurately it portrays many problems that we face in society today.
But in the current digitized world, trivial information is accumulating every second, preserved in all its triteness, never fading, always accessible.
Rumors about petty issues, misinterpretations, slander.
All this junk data, preserved in an unfiltered state, growing at an alarming rate.
Everyone withdraws into their own small gated community, afraid of a larger forum. They stay inside their little ponds, leaking whatever truth suits them into the growing cesspool of society at large.
The different cardinal truths neither clash nor mesh. No one is invalidated, but nobody is right.
It is extremely profound, and the fact that the game purposely messes with the player to add to the uncertainty and discomfort makes the overall tension and experience just that much more rich.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
Honestly though, you have played the game for a long time. Don't you have anything else to do with your time?
Furthermore, upon multiple playthroughs of the game, you start to notice that it is hinted several times that everything may not actually be the way it seems, but they're hints that most people will likely never notice unless they've played the game at least once beforehand.
That man was not included in the simulation. He is not a factor in this mission, because they were never a part of the simulation. They're an unknown factor. He was never factored into the simulation. Leave him out of this.
Everything you've done here has been scripted. A little exercise set up by us.
You know, I can imagine that this game may have seemed a bit too surreal at the time when it was released with some of the things it discusses, such as fake news, AI, virtual reality, human nature, the widespreading of digital information at an unprecedented level, and so on. But it is genuinely quite alarming just how ahead of its time the game was, and how relevant a lot of what it says actually is today.
The digital society furthers human flaws and selectively rewards development of convenient half-truths. Just look at the strange juxtapositions of morality around you.
Billions spent on new weapons in order to humanely murder other humans.
Rights of criminals are given more respect than the privacy of their victims.
Although there are people suffering in poverty, huge donations are made to protect endangered species. Everyone grows up being told the same thing.
Be nice to other people.
But beat out the competition.
You're special. Believe in yourself and you will succeed.
But it's obvious from the start that only a few can succeed.
There are very few games out there today that can compete with this level of philosophical discussion, as well as accurately predict culturally relevant topics 2 decades later. And for that, as well as all of the above, I hold this game in extremely high regard. Metal Gear Solid 2 is a masterpiece in every sense of the word. It is a wine that just keeps getting better and better and better with time. And you are doing yourself and everyone around you a disservice if you consider yourself a gamer, but have not played this legendary work of art. So go ahead if you haven't, and see for yourself.
By the way, what is that?
Dog tags.
Anyone you know?
No, never heard the name before.
What's really bizarre is the fact you get no bitches.